Hello, I'm David Heyman, and I play Brace on the TV show Taboo. And you're listening to the Shat on TV podcast with Roger, Gene, and Big D.
Welcome back to Shat on TV Taboo Edition, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit FX and BBC series Taboo. I am one of your hosts, Roger Roper, and alongside me are my two co-hosts, Big D Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And Gene Lyons.
I don't want James Delaney to die either.
And this is our deep dive episode where we look back on this week's episode of Taboo and provide our immediate reactions, thoughts, and analysis. Gentlemen, this was episode 5. I have to say, like, the puzzle pieces are finally coming. They're finally being all placed together. Light is being shown on what this story is truly going to be. And as much as I enjoyed last week's episode 4, for all of its gratuitous sex and violence, I felt like we got some much needed exposition. And I texted you guys, this is my favorite episode of the season thus far. What did you think?
I am increasingly starting to feel like the show just is caught in a loop a la Westworld. I feel like every episode has to have like these key components, like Thorne's going to do something really terrible, and Zilpha's going to be hurt by it, and James is going to cut somebody with a knife, and then he's going to do some sort of a ritual thing. And, Chudley is going to do some wacky stuff because he's cuckoo, and then there's going to be an awkward conversation with Dumbarton, and then they're going to be at odds and everyone's skeptical. And then Strange is going to come on and get really pissed at somebody. It feels like every episode is kind of getting to be the same. And I'm getting a little nervous that if you stay in that spin cycle, you've only got 3 episodes to wrap this thing up. We're going to get another Westworld season 1 where everything's going to get jammed into the last one.
As long as we don't get any more scenes of the Prince Regent eating ostrich eggs or just gorging himself, I'll be okay. That's the loop I want to stay out of.
Not just eating ostrich eggs in the presence of a stuffed ostrich.
Before we started the series, I was deathly afraid that there was not going to be any humor. And for the first 3 episodes, there's none. But these last 2 episodes, I mean, with Prince Regent and with the chemist, even Dumbarton has some good lines. Just in that drive, you watch House of Cards. I mean, he's brilliantly funny in the driest possible way.
I think James even shows a little bit of panache in the duel scene.
Oh yeah,
when he compliments, my apologies, that was an excellent shot.
Yeah.
I think that the show is, now that it's got everything established, it's got the gloom established, it's got that dark cloud over London, they can finally let loose a little bit.
Yeah. So we did mention Westworld. I do want to address something that I saw on Reddit. By the way, we got a very nice shout out on Reddit, but they said. You guys talk about your Westworld podcast too much, and I didn't know how to respond to that.
Great, so you fucking decided to talk about it. So
I'm just saying I didn't respond to it on Reddit. But like if we bring up Westworld, it's because it's the only other show that we've reviewed. So I mean, of course, they're going to make allusions to it. So, but we will do a better job of trying not to talk about Westworld. Which, by the way, we just released our February episode of Westworld Telegraph. So be sure to download that.
Listen, America, if you're listening to me, and everyone abroad, thank God we're talking about Westworld, because before that, if you remember, Rogers would only talk about The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones. So this is a huge step forward. Oh, and Star Wars.
That's right. So if you're tuning in for the first time, if you've never heard Taboo, thank you so much for listening. Here's the format. We don't go in a scene-by-scene linear format where we regurgitate the entire episode's plot back to you. We talk in buckets. We talk about ideas and, main plot points, and then we discuss them more in detail. So I'll give those in just a moment. But if you want to join the conversation, we also do a second episode weekly called River Rants, where we read and respond to the fan and listener emails and their thoughts on the television show. If you want to partake in that, our email address is hosts@shatontv.com, and you can see every email and listener feedback and everything you want to know about Shat on TV, Roger, myself, Gene, and Big D on our website, shatontv.com. With that being said, here are the 5 questions and topics that I want to talk about, gentlemen. The first one is, why was Brace so eager to have Horace's trunk burned? Gene, I do want to talk about that duel. I'm also going to ask the question, how is the sinking of the influence played into James' motivations? What is the real reason James is manufacturing gunpowder? Is it Cholmondeley? It's not Chumley from Pawn Stars. It's Cholmondeley.
It's right? Chundley.
It's Chun-Li? All right.
Yeah, the English have a great way of just, abbreviating words by taking entire syllables out, like Leicestershire.
Is he a risky ally? We'll round out tonight's conversation with Zilpha having the so-called God beaten out of her. So those are our topics that I wrote down that I think we discussed. Is there anything else you want to add before we begin? All right, so right off the bat, gentlemen, and one of the cool things that, I immediately texted, because I saw this episode before you guys did, and I spoiled it for Gene a couple times, but I was so excited because the duel right off the bat, we talked at lengths about like the rules and the regulations of dueling at that time. And lo and behold, everything that we had talked about, unbeknownst to us, they not only discussed, but James does the honorable thing and doesn't shoot Thorne. What did you guys think of the whole duel?
First of all, that was not honorable. He didn't discharge the weapon into the ground. He used the bullet to shoot the East India rep second of Thomas that ran away. But I did enjoy seeing the entire setup, the negotiation that went into it. I thought it was very interesting that Lorna had to have eyes on the duel. We're led to believe that she did it out of an affection for James and that she cared about him, even though she said she doesn't want James Delaney to die. But I felt it was more of a clinical. She needed to actually see what was going on and confirm the results. But the duel was great. I liked it.
Right. Again, if you follow in the theory that Lorna is conspiring with the Americans or is in fact Carlsbad, because everything would go to the Americans if James should die, she would want to see what's going on here. And so I think that they would have to put things in motion very quickly in that event. I agree with you, Big D, for cracking that. My original thought was that she was trying to literally walk in his footsteps, that she'd become somehow obsessed with him. But your explanation, Big D, makes much more sense.
Also, James, as much as we think he's proficient and he's skilled, he is just fucking lucky. There's multiple times now where he could easily have been killed, whether it was the first assassination attempt, if he wasn't being tailed, or now he is hit in the chest. He is dead unless the East India had stepped in.
First of all, that shot, I don't think it was in the chest. I think it was his upper left shoulder, right?
Oh, that hit him right in the chest.
Oh, did it? Okay.
That's why he complimented. Great shot.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is Thorne he by all rights would have killed James right there. I mean, that was a good shot. He showed his mettle there. But it's interesting that, when you bring your second to a duel, your second is there to basically stand for you and also enforce the rules of the duel. For instance, if you were to have a duel with somebody and they were to fire and they fired not from their mark, if they fired at the wrong time or from the wrong place, your second is justified in shooting them if you're shot. Like that, they can do that. You want your second to be like your best man at your wedding. This should be the person you should. And what does it say about Thorne? That the best guy he could get is a company man who also is not trustworthy.
And you talk about the humor. I love that James walks up to a deadly duel that Thomas has challenged him, and this is going to be his big moment. And James goes, "Good morning." I thought it was great. In this serious situation, he still shows how he just doesn't give a shit.
Okay, so a couple questions on this scene. Do you think that James let Thorne shoot him?
No.
Because James shows up. He said he doesn't even have a second, right? Lorna is his de facto second, but he didn't even bring a second pistol, right? It was just his one gun. You don't think that he knew or was trying to ferret out what was going on between he and Thorne?
That's a real long, risky play.
You think so?
Yes. Death, there is no higher stakes. Yes. For you to put all your cards in on maybe Thorne's second is an agent of the East India, yeah, that's a stretch.
So you think he was completely surprised by the fact that Thorne had that good of a shot in his chest and he could potentially be dead?
Yes. James is quite confident, and sometimes we'll say overconfident. He's quite proficient with that short blade. He doesn't seem like a man who really would be using a firearm.
I think you're wrong about that, because when he guns down the company man, that's a clear headshot with a cannon right there.
Well, I'm just talking about weapon of choice.
Okay.
If he truly was a pistol man, he would be carrying one where he always defaults to the short blade.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So his weapon of choice is not the pistol, but he's still proficient when it comes to pistol wielding.
Correct.
Quick word on his weapon of choice. So that's a karambit, which is it's got Indonesian origins. It's a weapon of sort of the South Pacific, and it's a defensive weapon of like last resort. Like the warrior class in that area did not use the karambit. So it's interesting that he's using a defensive weapon to carry out his acts, which indicates that he's not going around attacking people. That's not his intent. So if you watch James, he's not going out and seeking people out and killing them. He's always defending himself. It's a very important distinction.
Okay, so if indeed, in fact, there was actual bullet in Thorne, right, on top of being injured, right, he could possibly put off another shot. But if that didn't happen, does he shoot Thorne? Right? If the second in command of Thorne turns out not to be a company man of the EIC, does he kill Thorne?
I don't think he would have. In that situation, he shot the second to prove a point. But say the bullet had been actually just misfired, went over James's shoulder. Right. I don't see that James would benefit because he still does care about his sister. And as much as he is possibly the worst husband in all of London to Zilpha, I think James knows that his death would still in some small way cause her pain.
This is what I struggle with because we asked that question last week, whether or not he would do the gentlemanly thing and fire in the air or not kill Thorne. But what does that say about James's relationship with Zilpha that he would continue to allow a man like Thorne to beat the shit out of someone that he loves?
Thorne knows he's lost Zilpha. Like no matter what happens, he knows that he's lost her. So James knows that Thorne is now obsessed with him. The relationship is between James and Thorne now, not between Thorne and Zilpha. And so he knows that he's going to dig himself deeper. It's a long play. It's very strategic in the sense that he knows, and it's proven, I think, by the end of this episode, that if he allows Thorne to just behave as Thorne behaves, it will drive Zilpha back to him.
Yeah, I think that part of the beatings and the abuse that Zilpha takes is she's acting as a surrogate for James. All of his anger is now being projected onto Zilpha. We see in the end it's not going to end in a good place.
Sorry. It's interesting because Thorne basically has everything that he would want in the sense that he has the woman that James wants. He has the social standing. He is accepted in society and not thought of as a pariah. He's got all the things, but he is so obsessed that he feels like he's nothing, and because he doesn't have a love, he cannot win a love. So it's very, very strange that there's this juxtaposition where the guy who, as they would say, has it all, feels like he has nothing just because of this one dude.
The last question on the duel that I want to talk about, when Thorne returns back to Zilpha, he asks whether or not she sent out the handmaiden for, was it champagne or potatoes?
Right.
Do you think she wanted James to kill Thorne, or do you think that she wanted Thorne to return back?
Oh, I think it's clear. Her reaction as her husband walks back up to the house is restrained despair. I think she clearly wanted James to kill him. When he returns home, she's uneasy and nervous and visibly upset.
One of the other big things that happened in the episode is James's father's trunk was returned to him by Lorna Bowe. Do you think that Brace knew about this trunk, and why do you think he was so eager to have Horace's trunk burned?
Well, that's what I always find myself asking. What are people's motivations? So before we knew what was in the trunk, it could have been anything. Brace mentions that what's in the trunk is the truth. So until we know what's in there, you could think maybe he's protecting James. There's some dark, really unknown truth that we're yet to see. But what we find in there is less than groundbreaking. It is a bunch of letters that Horace had sent to James. So there is some emotional connection there. There is the treaty within the trunk, but there is nothing that is a groundbreaking truth. So I always ask myself, how would burning the trunk benefit Brace? Since obviously there was no benefit to James. So that has to make me question Brace's motives. Why, in your opinion, Gene, why would Brace want the chest burned if it did not benefit James?
Well, I mean, if he wants it burned, he knows the contents of it, and in doing so, he knows the treaty's in there for one, which would be damning. But that doesn't answer the question why he wouldn't just take the treaty and destroy it himself. He has seen the deterioration and the scandal that the contents of that trunk. I mean, that's basically the living remembrance of Horace. He's seen the disaster that's brought upon him. So, I mean, I do see that in a sense that it's kind of like a Horcrux of a trunk. He wants to get rid of it. But, I mean, it is important to note that we don't know all that's in there. I mean, James is burning all sorts of stuff, but it seems like it does speak to a certain ulterior motive.
When we first see James, going through the contents of the trunk, when Lorna enters the room, he appears to me to be visibly upset, emotional. He's going through and burning his father's letters. We know that he had referenced in the past having conversations with his father by the fire, but we don't know what the state of their relationship was. These piles of letters and notes and pictures from Horace's travel paint a picture of a loving father who has possibly lost his son. And maybe the truth is that James thought his father didn't care all those years, or thought his father had somehow disowned him. And to find a trunk of memories, and now that your father has passed, and all those years that you hated him, to see that he still had a love for you, that's the only reason I could think that Brace would want the trunk burned, to protect James.
Okay, so Brace knew that this trunk existed. He knew that, and he said, I had hoped that Horace would have burned that years ago or set it down in the river if it floated or something like that. So Lorna was in possession of this trunk the entire time. So is the relationship between Lorna Bowe and Horace legit?
Oh, I think without a doubt the marriage is legitimate now that we know it had actually happened. Lorna has intimate knowledge of the contents of the letters, and she seems to actually have an affinity for both James and Horace and their relationship. She questions why he's burning it, and it's not a strategic move. It's an emotional move. She's visibly upset, and she leaves the room. There are a few bits that we learn in there about how James feels about the treatment of his mother.
I had the impression up until this point that James and his father were very close, that he held his father in very high regard. And it seems that he does feel a bit of guilt for the actions of his father. He laments that his father bought Nootka for gunpowder and lies along with his mother. I wondered earlier when watching the episode if the plan was for the gunpowder is actually to make good on that contract to the Nootka. It sounded to me from this scene that maybe he feels the Nootka actually got shafted in this deal, but I wouldn't stake my life on it. It just seems like I got the impression that he felt like he owed them a debt of some sort.
Big D, you mentioned that you think that he's looking back at these letters and recollecting fondly upon Horace. I kind of took that a little bit differently when he says to Lorna that his father basically gypped the chief out of the land just for some simple gunpowder, and he bought my mother with beads, and then when she no longer wanted to play along with his charade, he just sort of put her out to the asylum. And he's kind of saying to me that his father's a bastard and he doesn't like him. I think maybe he's doing this for his mom.
But again, that is true, but we didn't learn that from the contents of the chest. He wasn't pulling out anything other than the Nunca Sound Treaty that showed his father's misdeeds. He might believe that his father, all his misdeeds from previous actions. I'm only going on what we see is in the trunk.
Right.
And there was nothing else that involved, what he references, his true mother, Anna, playing, whether she was a foreign ambassador or royalty. She was obviously involved in some form of scam. So okay. James has now given us the reason why he thinks she was committed and eventually died, because she wouldn't partake in James's father's scams. But we didn't see any of that in the trunk.
I just want to issue an apology to all gypsies listening right now. Raj didn't mean it that way.
What did I said gypsies? When did I say gypsies?
You said gypped.
Oh, I did. I'm so sorry. I did. That is I had no idea. I completely apologize for that. Okay, but do you feel that Brace treats Lorna differently when James isn't around? And if so, do you think that means that they are in cahoots together?
Well, one of the things we've always talked about on the show, we've talked about it, I think last episode too, is The reason why scenes are shown with people omitted or people by themselves is that you're supposed to see what it's like when when the show isn't on, right? So in the sense that we've always seen the three of them in the room together. Anytime Brace has been in the room with Lorna, James has been there too, at least in the scenes that we've seen. This is the first time we see the two of them alone without him around. And the way they behave toward each other is very telling of what their relationship is. They're not conspiring. They're not having a strategy session here. She is in the dark about him. He's in the dark about her. I think this puts to bed any sort of a theory that these two are working together in any sort of conspiratorial sense.
I concur.
As Lauren is dragging in the trunk alone with James isn't there, Brace is picking up the living room in the house. He says there were soldiers just there that turned over the house. Do you think those were soldiers of the EIC, or do you think they were soldiers of the Crown? And what were they looking for? Were they looking for this trunk?
They were described as soldiers in red and blue. Those are British royal soldiers.
I don't think they're looking for the trunk. I think they're looking for the gunpowder or any indication of where the gunpowder is.
So they don't know that this treaty exists, and now that James has it, what is he going to do with this?
Well, this treaty, again, it's critical to James because it demonstrates that Nootka Sound was acquired by his father under peaceful terms. If it was acquired by force or by war, the Crown, because they're at war, could actually claim control of it. So basically, if it was done by military force, the Crown could have some claim to it, but this is his proof that his father was able to obtain this land peacefully, and therefore it is a civilian matter.
And if I'm correct, later on in the episode, we see that Coop has a copy now of the treaty, that James has actually submitted it into the formal record. So there's not like James has the only copy and you can still use it as leverage against him. It is now formally on the books that this treaty exists and is legal.
One of my favorite lines of the episode is when Lorna walks away. She says, she asks James the question, "You've never bought a soul for beads?" What do you think she means by this line?
Well, this is in reaction to James, again, seeming to express disgust with his father for purchasing his mother, basically with beads. And she fires back at him, "You never bought a soul for beads." I think she's calling out the hypocrisy of James, or her perceived hypocrisy of James, saying that he likely was a slaver. We're giving every indication now. His tie to the influence being off of the coast of Cabinda, the slaves dying, which matches up with his flashback. I think we're getting every confirmation here, Raj, that you were correct in your belief that James was complicit in the slave trade. Lorna is aware of it, which is interesting, and how that affects her view of him. But also, he seems to think that he's gotten some redemption. Or is seeking redemption, but it's a confirmation, I believe, that he was involved with the slave trade.
I also picked up on something early in the episode, and I wasn't going to address it, but now that we've kind of walked into it, when James is having his meditation in the beginning of the episode, and he's disrupted, the vision involves himself during what we believe is his drowning episode with whatever the sinking of the ship was. There is a real subtle half second where he comes into light, where you can see he is wearing a military uniform and rank and insignia. Do we believe now this is proof that he was actually on an East India ship that was involved in human trafficking?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the way that Strange reacts to the fact that the Crown now knows about it has Strange pissed off, right? I mean, he's not in a happy place right now.
He's not just pissed off. He's coming unglued.
Yeah, he's scared. He's going to tell them which records to burn.
Yeah. They're going to have a shredding party, 1814 style. That brings me actually to my next big point here. And the question is, how has the sinking of the Influence, the slaver trading ship, played into James's motivations?
Well, now we see it's paramount. The timing of it was 10 years ago, July 10th, when the Influence was sunk. And we get most of the information of this from George Chichester. I probably butchered that, but I'll just call him George from now on. And George is a representative for the Sons of Africa, an anti-slave group. And we learn that since the sinking of the ship that lost 280 souls, 120 men, 84 women, 76 children, the Sons of Africa have been writing to the Crown and trying them to open a formal investigation into the EI's involvement in human trafficking and also just the loss of life in that event for negligence. So it is clear that this event has influenced what his motives are.
Did you say it's influenced his motivation? No. I know. God, that was terrible. Ugh. One of the interesting parts about this, in the Sons of Africa, Gene, they actually existed, right? This was actually a slave abolition movement, similar in the vein of, what we had here in America, where you had abolitionists, lawyers trying to do the legal means necessary. They were an advocacy group that were propelling this idea of removing slave trade from the crown, from England, abolishing the slave movement. But it seemed to me that until James Delaney got involved, the crown was kind of like burying, like they didn't really care that much. Or it seems to me that the EIC was like a huge opponent for the Sons of Africa. Like, is this the equivalent of Roger Roper law firm going up against Chase Manhattan Bank, right? Like, it's the little guy going up against the big guy here, right? That's what we're seeing.
Did you just use a fictional occurrence as a metaphor for another fictional occurrence?
I sure did.
For a real occurence?
Yeah, I sure did.
All right, here's the deal, Raj. So basically, we've got to understand that by 1833, I believe, slavery in the entire British Empire is gone. Earlier than that, the trade of slaves was already illegal. So, it's kind of like any other law, like with drug laws or anything else. It was phased. And in that sense, this hurt the empire. It also hurt the EIC, the phasing out of slavery. Now, of course, I would never argue against abolition, but from the perspective of what it did to the EIC and to the British, yes, this hurt them economically. It was part of the downfall of the EIC and in the fall of the British Empire was that inability to engage in the slave trade. Part of that was the activism by London's black community. These were educated former slaves and also their allies. So they had funding, they had intelligence, and they had the ear of the crown. So it was more of a social movement that hurt the country and the EIC, especially economically. So when we're talking about the influence, part of the reason the influence might have been sunk, actually, and part of the reason they want to cover it up is because they were not allowed to be traveling or trading slaves at that time. So this shows the EIC knowingly was involved in the slave trade when it was illegal.
And this leads to, we had always questioned James' true motives. And I've believed his motives are to bring the company down. He is now using all of his little pieces, and he's using the sinking, he's using the Sons of Africa, he's using all of these yearly appeals to the crown to investigate as a wedge. He has now gotten the crown and the East India to be at odds over the Nunca Sound, to the point now where you see the Prince Regent is now willing to accept and force an investigation into the EI. He doesn't only want to do an investigation into the EI. Coop convinces him to go directly after Sir Strange. Not just the East India, but Sir Strange. And in that, his evidence he uses is the actual appeal for intervention from the crown from George and the Sons of Africa. So we're starting to see how James is manipulating the pieces, the smaller pieces, to leverage the big players against each other.
I thought James had already set forth the fact that the crown was going to be pissed off at the EIC for the negligence in their guarding of the saltpeter.
Okay, it's like my mother always told me. It's the straw that broke the camel's back. It is the sum of all the actions. Each one of them, the negligence and the gunpowder, it's adding up to the point where now Coop and the crown are willing to move on the East India.
I think we'll talk more about the gunpowder in a bit, but kind of piggybacking on what Big D said, one of the things to consider is everything James does has multiple reasons. For instance, the gunpowder thing. Yeah, it pisses off the EIC. Yeah, now it gives the crown a reason to go after the EIC. But also, he would now have gunpowder, which makes him powerful in the sense that people want, like the Americans, want the gunpowder. In addition, when you're talking about the influence in that investigation, in setting that in motion, yeah, he's pitting these two against each other, but he's actually getting someone to look into the sinking of the influence.
And you also notice now, very few people are focusing on the actual Nunca Sound Treaty. They're now focusing on other things. So He has managed to shift the focus of both these players off of him.
Do you think that James is behind this, the Sons of Africa? Like, do you think that he's given them money or hinted to the fact that, hey, maybe now's a good time to present this in front of the crown?
I think he's clearly sympathetic to the cause. So if he can bring down the East India and also have Sir Strange possibly charged, incarcerated, and have the India fall, plus also advancing the rights of slave and awareness of what's going on, it's a win-win.
Gene, you had touched on the gunpowder idea, which brings me to my next topic. What's the real reason James is manufacturing this gunpowder?
I said before that I thought that maybe he felt he owed a debt to the Nootka, that there was some sort of a contract that wasn't fulfilled. Maybe the gunpowder was never delivered that his father promised. But beyond that's a stretch of a theory. I think the closer theory is that gunpowder is badly needed. We see the Americans need it to maintain their naval blockade, and we know that the English need it because they're at war, not just one war, as they've asked before on the show, which war are you even talking about? England was embroiled in so many wars at the turn of the 19th century. So in that sense, it begs the question, really, what does he want it for? Gunpowder is power, and power is what he needs. He needs leverage.
Well, I also want us to remember, he is not setting up a continuous production chain of gunpowder. He will not be producing gunpowder beyond this initial batch that he has set up. So we can take off of the list of possible motives trade of gunpowder, because he's going to have a limited amount. He's not going to be able to produce enough to really impact a war continuously from this batch. He doesn't have saltpeter. He has limited manufacturing capabilities.
An interesting event in episode 5 as well is we knew before that he wanted to make gunpowder and do something with it, clearly. What we didn't realize, or what developed in episode 5, was that he has to accelerate the production of gunpowder because he is, in essence, being blackmailed by Dumbarton.
It led me to believe that his purpose for the gunpowder is simply a piece. It's a commodity of leverage. That, sure, there's some far-stretched theories that he's going to use it as some form of act, possibly to blow up some form of the East India, the crown, or maybe blow up the naval blockade. But after this episode, I truly believe it's just a bargaining chip. And without the gunpowder being finalized and actually a finished product, he's lost. So he needs to push the production forward.
Yeah, I like that, Big D, but I do wonder, why would he accelerate other than if he intended to hand it over to Dumbarton? Like, that's the part that Dumbarton's got him, dead to rights. He knows where he's producing it. He knows who's involved with the production, and who knows what else he knows. He's got James pegged, and what's interesting is the Countess Musgrove, when James goes to talk with her about it, she has no idea.
Well, that leads to one of two possibilities, that Dumbarton is working separately from the Americans' cause and he's a rogue agent on his own. But it could be simply more likely that James knew the Americans needed gunpowder, but wasn't truly aware of how desperate they were and that the window was 8 days, that they're going to run out in 10 days and they need the gunpowder in 8. He may have miscalculated the actual timetable.
That's a good point, because he also, when he's speaking with Musgrove, part of the deal is safe passage to, America. That would not be guaranteed if they had no gunpowder to maintain a blockade.
During last week's episode, when James meets the Countess Musgrove, we all assumed that, hey, if we're seeing this through James's eyes, James assumes that Musgrove is Carlsbad. But when he has the conversation with Musgrove, who he thinks is Carlsbad, she has no idea. So is Musgrove Carlsbad, or are they two separate characters? We don't know who Carlsbad is yet.
I mean, I think it echoes what Big D just said, is that either Musgrove is Carlsbad and Dumbarton's working on a side thing that the American power structure doesn't know about. Because she says that she's elevated James's request and moved it up the chain, but it seems like she doesn't know about the gunpowder. So either Dumbarton's working alone, or this is a foil and there's another person who's the true Carlsbad. Which again, I think there's some indications that it could be Lorna Bowe.
Do you think that's who's feeding Dumbarton this information? Right. So Dumbarton, like you said, he gives the address, he gives the amount of the miles it takes to get down to where they're producing this. He knows everything. Like you said, he's got James dead to rights. Who is feeding Dumbarton this information?
Well, we can go back to, he knows that it's down past the hatchet ground.
Right.
It's behind the cabin with the water wheel.
Right.
He does have detailed information. Now, who knows that? The only ones who know it so far are James's son,
Sure.
the gentleman who has been the keeper of James's son,
Okay.
The chemist,
Right.
or the giant who James killed at the cabin with the water wheel.
What's interesting about the giant thing is I was thinking about that earlier. James is starting a production facility for gunpowder where he knows he's been attacked. This seems really reckless.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I'm like, wait a minute. Didn't they try to assassinate him last episode in the same place? Why would he want to do the gunpowder manufacturing right there?
Dude, on top of that, he left the dead giant sitting outside the cabin.
Right.
So we can assume that someone's coming to pick up the body, maybe the authorities, or maybe the handler of the assassin. Seems kind of foolish.
If we're going to talk about foolish, I know he's pressed for time, but now let's get into where this gunpowder gets really wacky. Is he's doing it at the house, involves his son or brother or whatever he is as an apprentice to a guy who is a known drug user, essentially. And all this is going on when they're now going to introduce chlorates to the mix. If you're not familiar with chlorates, so the purpose of the saltpeter in gunpowder is it's the oxidizer, right? It causes, it's what makes things go boom, right? You've got the fuel and the oxidizer. So the chlorates are like far more unstable than saltpeter. The reason why they don't use chlorates in ammunition is that chlorate salts mixing with any combustible material, sugar, sawdust, charcoal, basically anything organic, any metal, it can catch fire. So this is bad. And I'm not talking like a slow burning fire. I'm talking like fast burning fire. Like there's a difference between a detonation and a deflagration, but this is it would burn so fast it would almost look like an explosion.
Yeah, Cholmondeley makes it clear that when you introduce the chlorate into the vats, you have to continuously stir it. It takes actually better handling. You have to baby it. But even if you baby it, it is still a likely chance of it going boom. For him to do this with his son, half-brother, kind of a dick move, real dick move. So we know that James is pushed to actually do it. But I told the guys before we started recording, I got a real Breaking Bad vibe in this.
Yeah.
And I think I want to do like a little fan cut with Cholmondeley and the boy and as Jesse and Walt and do a Breaking Bad London.
1814 style. So talking about this, so you mentioned that you still are on the fence between whether or not the little boy at the farmhouse is James's son or his half brother. Cholmondeley or whatever we're calling him here, Chunley here, Walter White, 1814. He basically gets it out of James. He almost gets James to admit there. I think he does get James to admit, in fact, that it is his son.
A denial is not a confirmation.
He didn't deny it.
No, that's exactly the point. So you're taking his non-confirmation that he didn't say, no, this is not my son. He didn't give any verbal cues, but he also did not claim that he was wrong.
Listen, all right.
If I say to you, Roger, is it true that you slept with two dudes last night?
Right.
And if you don't answer me, that does not mean you did it.
Oh, come on. You know it does. Absolutely it does.
Okay, well, here's a better question.
That was a terrible example, Big D.
Yeah.
Why?
Because you
Because
know
if I did it, I'd be like, no.
Yeah.
Oh, God, okay, so that's true. But do we...
Not
do
that there's anything wrong with that.
No.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, if all three of you are, consenting adults, it's beautiful. Just go have fun. But do we believe now that Cholmondeley is going to continue to work for James? He said, James, if you want to mix in the chlorate, you're going to need to find yourself a new chemist.
Right.
So does James need a new chemist?
Well, it brings me to my next question. The next point where I want to go is Cholmondeley or Chunley, whatever we're fucking calling this guy, is he now a risky ally? Because that trust seems to have been broken now that James is pressuring him to do something that Cholmondeley, he's a very smart, intelligent guy, and he's probably my favorite character of the show. He knows that if he is pressured to do this in 8 days, there's a very high risk that this is going to go wrong. Is he going to break off of Team Delaney?
He knows more than he should know, and James is not comfortable with how much he knows. We also know that Dumbarton's getting information that he probably shouldn't know. We also get these weird inquiries that Cholmondeley seems to be hiding or trying to communicate with Lorna in ways that he's masking as sexual attraction. He says, not only is she among the large women I would sleep with, she's also among the small number of women I would masturbate over. He's trying to be like, I'm going to try to hit on her, but he's not really interested in her. That's not his style to begin with. He's the David Blaine, Chris Angel going to bang you in the back room kind of guy. He's not going to court someone. So it seems very strange. He seems to be masking a different motivation.
Yes, I believe that the book that the chemist had delivered to the Delaney household for Lorna wasn't a show of affection or a romantic advance, but a way of secretly communicating. Whether there was a message hidden in the book, whether there was a note, that was the only way for him to get correspondence to her.
Is this more evidence that Lorna Bowe could, in fact, be Carlsbad?
Oh, very well could be. She is definitely a player. She's much more intelligent than she lets on. She plays that she's naive. And even that whole comment in the beginning, what her motivations to watch the duel was, that she's never watched a man be shot before, I'm calling bullshit. She has seen a man shot, and she knows what's going on.
Fascinating to me was Cholmondeley seems like almost like the Riddler in this show, where he's dropping hints left and right. And I picked up on a couple things he said. Regarding Lorna Bowe, he says, can I call on her for tea or something? And I thought it was interesting that James sent the message that tells Carlsbad, I want tea. And he wants that monopoly on tea. And I didn't know if Cholmondeley's trying to drop these little hints because he can't help himself. Again, you got to remember, this guy's getting high on chemicals all the time.
Right.
And he's a very, very hyper-intelligent guy. Another thing he does is when he's stirring up the gunpowder mixture and James walks in, he acts like he's talking to himself and then very quickly turns that dagger right at James. He says, go make ready breakfast, love thy husband, look to thy servants, cherish thy guests. Thou shalt fight me tractable to any honest reason. Thou seest I am pacified. And then he goes on to point that at, he mentions Delaney. So he's taking lines from Henry IV, from the Falstaff character, and then bringing it into the present and pointing it right at James. He says Delaney by name, which is not obviously obviously not part of the original text. So I went back and did some research on Falstaff just to kind of get a quick character profile of him and see what Cholmondeley might be indicating here. So tell me if any of this sounds familiar. So Falstaff is very clever, drinks with petty criminals, lives on stolen money, and he leads a young Henry IV, also known as Prince Hal, into trouble. So this young heir apparent, this young man who has his eyes on the throne, is being led into mischief by Falstaff. It seems like Cholmondeley sees himself that way.
So do you feel, and for those who don't know Henry IV, it was a play by Shakespeare.
Right, yeah. So Falstaff is in Henry IV, also in Henry V, and I believe Merry Wives of Windsor as well. He's a recurring character, kind of seen as this kind of fat, like heavy drinking guy who hangs out at taverns and stuff a lot, but has a very clever depth to him.
This is a very Shakespearean thing to do, to put characters like Falstaff throughout all of his works. But does that mean that Cholmondeley is actually a spy? Right? Could he be working for the Americans? Could he be working with Carlsbad? Could he possibly be working for the EIC or the Crown?
I don't see him working for the EIC or the Crown. I think it's a very strong chance that he could be working for the Americans. Remember, we've already established that about 40% of London's population are spies and secret agents. So anybody could be.
Yeah. It's odd that he continues to ingest saltpeter, because that's not something you want to do, right? We have a PSA for this.
Yeah, saltpeter is not good for you in any way. Like, these are, when they talk about like nitrates in your food, it's basically pure that. Like, you do not want to eat this stuff. It can cause blue lips, numbness, circulatory issues, and not only does he eat it, he gives it to the kid too.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the kid, why would he allow his son get so close in a highly risky proposition where the whole farmhouse could go up in flames very quickly? But he wants to prevent Lorna Bowe from interacting from Cholmondeley, or Cholmondeley, when he asks, "Hey, can I go call on her? Can I get a piece of that? Hey, if you're not hitting it, can you be a bro and hook me up?" James puts his foot down and says, "No, I don't want you going anywhere near that." Does that mean that James loves Lorna Bowe and he sees something with Lorna Bowe, or is there another reason?
Yeah, the reason is he needs an assistant who he can trust, who's not going to go run and tell the police or the EI what they're doing there. That was why he brought him into the loop. He told him where they got it from and that anyone involved in the plot would be hung and that you are now one of us. So he has a ready-made assistant who can stir all day and will not be compromised.
I think what Raj is asking, though, is that James has several people who have killed for him and were actually involved in the stealing. He could easily involve one of them and not this child. I think the bigger question, though, is, as Raj is asking, is why trust Cholmondeley with your potential son or brother and not trust him with Lorna? I don't think it's love. I think, Big D, as you've theorized, he wants to keep Lorna and Cholmondeley separate from each other because he does not want them to conspire. He wants to limit their ability to communicate to letters and things like that that could be monitored, or at least not allow them free speech. Note that he keeps all these separate players away from each other. It's not like he's having a big meeting and getting the chemist and Lorna and Helga's girls and Atticus's guys all in one room together and having, this like a henchman conference. He keeps them all separate.
And this goes back to his overall theme. You don't let your enemies find a common goal, a common driver. So he, like you said, he's keeping them separate. And don't get on James' bad side because you might lose a finger.
Yeah. I love that he, the finger thing was cool, but the cooler thing is with Helga's women, when he put the thumb down and the diamond next to it, it made a very, very visual representation of your two choices. You can get rich here or you can lose your fingers.
Yeah, so I didn't quite get for as cool as the thumb, cutting off. Did we ever see that character before? Like, why did he walk in there? What was that whole scene?
We don't need to see him. We just know that the Crown has a bounty out for information on the gunpowder.
Okay.
And with the type of man and the type of women, the type member of the Legion of Doom or whatever we're calling it, his associates are not the most reputable, trustworthy, upstanding citizens. Most of them would sell you out for £10.
Okay,
so whether or not this was real, that this actual member of his crew had turned and thought about, or it was just an attempt for James to intimidate the crew into thinking, like he says, I always know what you're thinking. Essentially, I'm in your head. Even if that one member of the crew had not thought about turning him in, the rest of the crew surely is not thinking about it now. Because James is already thought of as having mystical powers, and God forbid he can read my mind. I'm staying loyal to the mission.
Well, I sure as hell hope that guy, whether he was the underling of Atticus, that he was a mercenary for hire, that was talking a little bit too much at the tavern. I hope that he really was talking. Otherwise, he just fucking cut off some poor innocent guy's thumb. You know what I mean? Like that's pretty terrible.
I think people need to get comfortable really quickly in the next, before the next 3 episodes, with the fact that James is not concerned with being a good guy. He's not concerned with being a hero. He has one mission and he will do anything to get to it. He is using everyone. He's not looking out for anyone. He's using, even to the point of Zilpha, like you mentioned, Raj, he's not protecting her completely. He is trying to get to where he is trying to get. He wants his crew in the New World, bringing the EIC down and getting that trade monopoly. That's what he wants.
Well, speaking of Zilpha, and this is our final topic for the podcast that I wanted to discuss, it seems as if he intended for all this to happen. At the end of the episode, again, you see her almost telepathically using her Jedi mind trick to talk to Delaney, to talk to James and say, teach me the ways of, the Force. I want to use this. I want to become a Sith Lord like you. This is after Thorne has brought home what appears to be a Catholic priest or preacher to do an exorcism on her. Was the exorcism, did it bring out her Jedi powers? What happened there?
I don't know if this was a legitimate exorcism, because I don't remember seeing that breast manipulation or fondling were part of an exorcism. This might be some old school technique, but to me, I don't know this was really an exorcism.
This scene brought a couple things to light. First of all, if we want to talk about how dark this show can get, beyond the murders, beyond the psychosis, beyond the nightmares and all that stuff, these scenes where Thorne is involved, especially with Zilpha, are just disgusting. They're disturbing. When he gets his, it's going to be Joffrey style satisfaction on this. Spoiler alert again. But in addition to that, it's interesting that he has fooled himself into thinking that he explains this all away, that he's caring for her, that he's going to push this evil out of her so she could be a good wife, maybe have some kids, and that's not who Zilpha is.
No, and you're talking about being uncomfortable. Really, we see how poorly women have been treated through history. And if this show does anything other than shine a light on this specific period, I feel horrible. Every episode, you see the life that women were forced to live and the conditions that they were forced to live under. Whether it's the prostitute scene, whether it's Zilpha, it is tough to watch. And again, I would rather watch the assassins being gutted. To see a woman struck on film, even though you know it's not real, to me, it does something visceral and it makes me really uncomfortable and feel terrible.
One of the things that was established here, I think, was this crystallized. I don't think anything supernatural happened with Zilpha in the sense that when the actual exorcism was occurring, there was any sort of spiritual change in her. I think what it did was she has clung to Christianity as in a way for atonement for what happened with James. And she then looked at what James was, what James represented, that primal, that pagan, and saw, okay, that's evil Christianity. Good. And I think this showed her that this assault showed her that Christianity can be as backward and barbaric as whatever James represents. And so that's when she turns Raj and says, teach me, guide me. And I think at that point, she has now opened up that door where she's gone, you know what? I'm going to embrace this thing that we have.
Right.
I see her having capabilities such as James's or superior. I think we've established, and I think you'll all agree, that James is not just the guy with a knife. He's got some other shit going on.
You hit the nail on the head, right? The fact that the last thing that she had to hold on to through all this abuse that she was having at the hands of Thorne, she felt guilty for, and Christianity was her atonement for this. Now that you got preacher Christian guy coming over and sexually assaulting me, I've got nothing else to lose. Like, I'm going to turn to my brother and this ancient tribal religion, or again, layman's term, I'm kind of making a joke here, but using the dark side of the Force, turning into a Sith Lord to use that against her captors. He basically, she hates the Sand People. Come on, help me out here.
The Sand People.
No, not the Sand People, but there's a name for them. Tusken Raiders. She hates the Tusken Raiders. No, those are Jawas.
Those Jawas.
I know you.
I'm glad we went from the sexual assault of a woman to Star Wars references and impersonations of Tusken Raiders. But I think that the collective audience, myself included, were so relieved that she didn't rise up from this incident and fall right back into the subservient wife role. I was terrified that was going to happen, because in reality, that is what happens. In reality, a person who is that ingrained in any sort of a cult or a false religion or false practice will be turned around and have themselves manipulated and think, no matter what bad thing happened to me, it was my fault. This is the way. This is what God wants.
And what's even more twisted to me isn't always the violence of like Thorne towards Zilpha. He has had her tied down. He beat her unconscious, but then he turns to her and says, "Are you coming to bed?" Like it's her obligation. She's an object. And when he gets his, I hope it is 10 times worse than Joffrey. It is much slower, because he will deserve a nice slow death. I want Zilpha to have a hand in it. She deserves her pound of flesh.
Well, that concludes all the things that I wanted to talk about for episode 5 of Taboo. Are there any other things that we want to talk about before we close down and get ready for the Taboo River Rants, which is our email listener feedback show?
Yes, I really want to give a shout out and a thanks to David Heyman, Brace, for giving us that amazing new intro.
Yeah, not only David Heyman, but our great friends Marty over at Great Northern Radio. You can follow them on Twitter. Marty has been instrumental in not only getting that, but he's a great proponent for the show. He sent a picture of David Heyman that we posted on social media holding up. He printed out in color nonetheless, a picture of our logo that David Heyman is holding, which is badass. So Marty, thank you so much for that. He's also designed our shirts and things like that, our logos. So again, Great Northern Radio. Make sure you follow them. They're based out of Scotland. What else?
We'll definitely put a link into the show notes, and we'll post that so people can follow.
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, Marty, please send us your address. Whatever the cost is to get you a shirt.
He did. I think he sent it.
Oh, did he? Okay, I need to check it. I apologize. If you sent it, Marty, thank you so much. We'll get you out some cool Shat on TV merchandise.
Did my Tuscan Raider impersonation sound good?
Dude, that was spot on.
You guys are so racist.
We racist. We've never seen them.
Tuscan Raiders are totally those are supposed to be tribal desert people.
Oh, hold on. Now you're making an assumption. We have never seen a physical, biological part of them. They are completely covered. So for you to say you know what they look like,
I don't know what they look like. That's not. I'm not saying I know what they look like.
Yeah, one could argue that the actual inhabitants and the native species of Tatooine are the Hutts, right? Like that slug-looking creature. Tuscan Raiders,
desert.
They're crazy. Okay, hold on. Listen, Roger.
They're wearing.
Roger.
Hold on. Tuscan Raiders are wearing crazy appendages to look like they have to. They're like covering their face. They probably can't survive in the desert. They're probably not from that planet.
Hold on, Roger.
Like an invading species.
Roger, you're a proponent of science, right?
Yes.
So let's look at our deserts.
Mm-hmm.
Could you picture a slug or large body that requires a lot of sustenance to survive? Does that happen in our deserts, or what type of animal survives there?
Well, I'm sure there's caves in Tatooine.
This is a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
What else? Gene, anything from the Shat outs?
Okay, hold on. When's the last time we recorded?
Last week, yours got cut because those 5 Shat outs, they got cut.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, they got cut.
Oh, that was when you were cracking.
That's when you were cracking.
Oh, so we got to do all of those. So that was shit. That goes back to January. Well, shit, what were the 5? Oh, we can look at last week's notes.
Yeah.
Oh, Raj, we have so many shout-outs this week. Huge shout-outs to Matt Wilson, Tom, Dansbury the Great, Jim, Stacy, Pedro Ferreira, JD, Jess, Sarka, Linda, Diana, Cynthia, and Anita. Those are people who visited shatontv.com and submitted their names via the little slide out bar that comes out when you scroll down the page, just to show their support for the podcast. We appreciate you visiting the website, getting your shout outs. And if anybody else wants a shout out, please jump on there and do it. We're happy to read your name on the podcast. And if you'd like to get on the podcast, otherwise, you can also write into us again, as Raj mentioned, hosts at shatontv.com.
Yeah, we drop our River Rants fan email response episode every Friday. So be on the lookout for that. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever fine podcasts are found. While you're there, please leave a 5-star review. That helps the podcast grow. We're everywhere on social media, including Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, at ShatOnTV. Listen, if you're a snapper, and I keep saying this, and you want some behind-the-scenes action of Gene, myself, do it on Snapchat, at ShatOnTV.
Yeah, actually, I was at the Trust concert earlier this week, and I sent a snap out thinking I was super cool, and nobody knew who Trust was. And I was like, look at me. And Gillian was like, I'm so jealous. And I was like, oh, man, I'm not the coolest person on the podcast. Gillian is cooler than I am. But yeah, it's it's awesome to stay in touch that way. I drop updates on what's going on when we're recording. I'll usually shoot a little snap out, but I love to also chat back and forth with you guys. Not going to show you my face, but I can show you. Well, that was going to sound terrible.
Phrasing. Oh, phrasing.
I meant.
You can also find us
beautiful Arizona landscapes.
That's right. You also find us on Facebook. Just search for Shat on TV Podcast. That website is shatontv.com. Oh, you can also find cool merchandise. We might have some merchandise inspired by Taboo, or we might not. I don't know.
So why are you promoting something that we don't know is there?
I like to keep the curiosity going. I like to keep the allure. But that helps keeps it keeps the lights on over here at Shat on Entertainment. On behalf of my two co-hosts, Big D, Dick Ebert, and Gene Lyons, I'm Roger Roper. Follow us on Twitter. You can find our individual bios at the Shat on TV Twitter bio. Just make sure you follow us there. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next Tuesday for our deep dive, but join us for Friday for Taboo River Rants. Thanks so much for joining. Take care. James does the fucking honorable thing, doesn't shoot.
Thorne.
I'm sorry.
Wait. He doesn't do the honorable thing? You're making it sound like...
Hold on. He does, because I want to get a good take there. Sorry.
Whoa.
Sorry about that. Fuck. My mic comes... Oh, shit! Everything's coming undone.
Burrito time.
Hey, does he sound normal to you?
No.
What do you mean I don't sound normal?
Sounds thin.
Yeah, it sounds real thin.
I sound thin?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I asked you about the audio, your levels.
Or it might not be coming out of the mic.
It sounds hollow. It sounds hollow and low.
Oh, does it? Hold on.
Yeah.
My,
What a fucking circus.
Sorry about
I was just thinking about how there's thousands of people who listen to us and probably these guys really have their shit together. I mean,
And if they
a cold burrito with a fork. It's knocking microphones all over the place.
And now he's half under his desk. At least I don't have a Slim Jim.
True. That's not what I heard.
But
Ew.
All right, well, I guess this will work. All right.
So put
right,
them
but-
just speak into the mic
that?
so we can tell.
Is this better?
What
Better or
check your
worse? What?
It's better. Just check the level just to ensure because it sounds.
All right, hold on.
Now it sounds...
I had it a little bit lower.
That sounds much...
Yeah, it's much better.
All right. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, no.
All right.